Before Jesus began his public ministry, he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where he fasted for 40 days. In that moment of physical weakness and isolation, Satan approached him, not with something that looked evil, but with subtle alternatives, paths that seemed easier, even justifiable. Each temptation was an invitation to take the shortcut, to avoid suffering, skip obedience, and reach the goal without going through the cost. But Jesus refused every offer. Why? Why turn down what looked like good things? Why stay in weakness when he had power? Why follow the harder path when an easier one was right there? In this video, we'll look at why Jesus rejected every shortcut and what that teaches us about the choices we face in our own lives. If this speaks to you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment. What's one area in your life where you've had to choose between obedience and convenience? Let's begin. According to Matthew 4:1, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. This means the moment wasn't accidental or forced. It was part of God's will, allowed for a purpose. The wilderness has always been a place of testing in Scripture. The most direct parallel is Israel's 40 years in the desert, where the people repeatedly failed to trust God. Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness echo that story. But this time, the outcome is different. Jesus remains faithful, even in hunger, isolation, and pressure. This setting reminds us that temptation often comes when we're alone, tired, or preparing for something important. But it also shows that even those moments can be part of God's plan, not to destroy us, but to strengthen and reveal what's truly in us. Satan didn't come to Jesus simply to tempt him with food, power, or attention. His goal was much deeper, to interfere with Jesus' mission before it began. At the baptism just before this, Jesus was declared the Son of God. Satan immediately challenges that identity. In fact, each temptation begins with the phrase, "If you are the Son of God," as if to say, "Prove it." But Satan wasn't trying to prove who Jesus was. He already knew. What he wanted was to entice Jesus to act outside of the Father's will, to rely on his divine power for selfish reasons, to test God, or to take a shortcut to kingship without going to the cross. In other words, Satan wasn't just offering sin, he was offering alternatives, easier paths, different outcomes. And that's how temptation still works today. It rarely comes as obvious evil, but often as something that seems reasonable, justifiable, or even spiritual, just not according to God's way. The first temptation: turn stones into bread. Matthew 4:3. If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. After 40 days of fasting, Jesus was physically exhausted and hungry. Satan's first suggestion seems harmless, even practical. Use your power to meet your own needs. But this wasn't just about food. The temptation was to act independently of the Father's will, to solve a real need in the wrong way. Satan was saying, "If you really are God's son, why should you suffer like this? You have power. Use it for yourself." Jesus responds by quoting Scripture, "Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Deuteronomy 8:3. He refuses to use his divine authority for self-interest. Instead, he places full trust in God's provision and timing. This temptation speaks to us too. How often are we tempted to take matters into our own hands when we feel God is taking too long? But Jesus shows us, obedience is more important than instant relief. The second temptation: throw yourself down. Matthew 4:5-6. If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. This time, Satan takes Jesus to the highest point of the temple and quotes Scripture himself. Psalm 91, a passage about God's protection. The temptation here is more subtle. If you really trust God, prove it. Force Him to act. Show everyone who you are. But Jesus doesn't fall for it. He responds with another verse. It is also written, "Do not put the Lord your God to the test." Deuteronomy 6:16. What Satan is suggesting is not faith, it's manipulation. He's urging Jesus to create a public miracle to force God's hand or to gain recognition. But true faith isn't about demanding signs. It's about trusting God without needing to test Him. This temptation reminds us that even Scripture can be twisted, and that real trust in God means obeying Him, not using Him. The third temptation, worship in exchange for power. Matthew 4:8-9. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." This is the most direct temptation of all. Satan offers Jesus authority, power, and glory. Everything the Messiah was destined to receive, but without the suffering, without the cross, without obedience to the Father. It's a shortcut, a kingdom without sacrifice, but at the cost of worshipping the enemy. Jesus' response is final and absolute. "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Deuteronomy 6:13. Jesus refuses to take the easy road. He chooses faithfulness over fame, obedience over comfort, and the will of God over worldly success. This moment reveals the core of Satan's strategy, not just in Jesus' life but in ours too. The temptation to abandon God's way in favor of something faster, easier, or more appealing. The temptation of Jesus wasn't just a moment from his personal journey. It's a model for every believer. We all face temptation. Often it comes when we're most vulnerable, when we're tired, alone, or standing at the edge of something important. Just like in the wilderness, the enemy doesn't always tempt us with something obviously evil. He offers shortcuts, half-truths, justifications that seem reasonable. But Jesus shows us a better way. Don't argue with lies, stand on truth. Don't act to prove yourself. Stay grounded in who God says you are. Don't take the shortcut, trust God's path, even when it's harder. The same Spirit that led Jesus into the wilderness is the same Spirit that strengthens us. And the same word that gave him victory is the word we have today. Temptation isn't something we can avoid, but with God, it's something we can overcome. If this message encouraged you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments. Which part of Jesus' response to Satan speaks to you the most? Stay strong in faith and see you in the next video.